MiG-15s were fast, deadly, and in greater numbers than intelligence had predicted. The communist jets dove from altitude, their swept wings cutting through the thin air with predatory grace. Eamon's wingman called out positions as the formation scattered into individual dogfights. This was the new reality of air combat in Korea, and American pilots were learning hard lessons about an enemy that could outclimb them, outturn them at altitude, and disappear into Chinese airspace before anyone could respond. But Eamon wasn't flying a straight-winged fighter like the F-80 shooting stars that were getting massacred over North Korea. He was strapped into something different, something that shouldn't have existed, at least not this soon. An aircraft whose wings swept back at 35 degrees, incorporating aerodynamic secrets that America had quite literally stolen from the ruins of Nazi Germany. The F-86 Saber. And in the brutal skies over Korea, it was about to prove that sometimes the spoils of war include knowledge worth more than territory. What the American public didn't know, what most pilots didn't know, was that the aircraft saving their lives had been born from captured German research, Soviet engine technology, and a desperate race to counter a threat that had appeared with shocking suddenness. This is the story of how America created a monster from stolen secrets. April 1945. As Allied armies pushed deeper into Germany's heartland, specialized teams followed close behind the advancing troops. These weren't combat units. They were intelligence operatives, scientists, and engineers participating in Operation Paperclip, a massive effort to capture German technology, research, and personnel before Soviet forces could claim them. Germany's aviation industry had spent the war years pushing boundaries that Allied designers considered impossible. Jet engines, rocket fighters, swept-wing designs that promised to break through the sound barrier. While American and British aircraft companies had focused on refining piston engine technology to its limits, German engineers had been exploring fundamentally different approaches to flight. At captured facilities across Germany, American teams discovered treasure troves of research data, wind tunnel test results, theoretical papers on transonic aerodynamics, prototype aircraft incorporating radical design features. The crown jewel sat in offices and laboratories belonging to Messerschmitt and other German aerospace firms. Comprehensive research on swept-wing configurations. The Germans understood something that Allied designers were only beginning to grasp. At high subsonic speeds approaching Mach 1, conventional straight wings created devastating drag increases and control problems. The airflow over the wing would reach supersonic speeds even while the aircraft remained subsonic, creating shock waves that destroyed lift and induced violent buffeting. Pilots called it compressibility, and it had killed numerous test pilots attempting to push their aircraft to higher speeds. German researchers, led by engineers like Adolf Busemann, had discovered that sweeping the wings backward delayed these problems. By angling the wing, the airflow perpendicular to the leading edge remained subsonic at higher aircraft speeds. This wasn't just theoretical. German designers had incorporated swept wings into late-war jets like the Me-262's proposed successor variants and the experimental aircraft that never reached production. American technical teams crated up documents, test data, and even entire wind tunnel models. They interviewed German engineers, offering them positions in American research facilities. Some came willingly, eager to continue their work. Others had little choice, facing occupation and uncertainty if they remained in Germany. The captured research represented decades of development compressed into boxes and file cabinets. American aircraft designers, who had been pursuing straight-wing jet fighters, suddenly had access to knowledge that would revolutionize their approach. But they weren't alone in this treasure hunt. Soviet forces had been conducting their own technical intelligence operations. They captured facilities in eastern Germany, including BMW and Junkers plants where jet engine development had occurred. More critically, they captured engineers and technicians who understood how to build these revolutionary power plants. The Soviets took a different approach than the Americans. Rather than just acquiring data, they essentially transplanted entire design bureaus to the Soviet Union,
German engineers found themselves relocated to facilities near Moscow, tasked with continuing their work under new management. One critical acquisition was engine technology derived from German research into axial flow turbojets. British designs had pioneered jet engines, but German engineers had developed sophisticated compressor and turbine designs that offered better performance. Soviet engineers studied these systems intensely, reverse engineering and improving them. The result was the Klimov VK-1 engine, heavily influenced by British designs the Soviets had obtained through diplomatic channels, but incorporating improvements derived from German research. This engine would power an aircraft that would shock American intelligence when it appeared over Korea. Soviet designers at the Mikoyan-Gurdjieff Bureau were tasked with creating a high-altitude interceptor capable of destroying American strategic bombers. They had access to capture German swept-wing research, they had powerful engines, and they had Stalin's explicit directive to create the best fighter aircraft in the world. The MiG-15 emerged from this effort, a swept-wing jet fighter with phenomenal performance. Its design incorporated lessons from German research, Soviet engineering pragmatism, and a single-minded focus on high-altitude interception. The aircraft could climb to 50,000 feet and remain effective in the thin air where American bombers operated. Western intelligence knew something was being developed, but the MiG-15's capabilities remained largely unknown until Chinese and North Korean pilots began flying them in combat over Korea.
Meanwhile, in California, North American Aviation was developing a new jet fighter for the U.S. Navy. The initial design, designated NA-134, featured conventional straight wings and was intended as a carrier-based interceptor. Development proceeded through 1945 with the expectation of a straightforward evolution of jet fighter technology. Then North American's chief aerodynamicist, Larry Green, reviewed the captured German research data that had begun circulating through American aviation companies. The wind tunnel results and theoretical papers on swept wings were revelatory. Green recognized immediately that incorporating swept-wing technology would dramatically improve the fighter's performance. But this created a significant problem. The Navy's contract specified a certain design. Making fundamental changes this late in development risked delays, cost overruns, and potential contract cancellation. North American's leadership faced a decision: proceed with the conventional design that met specifications, or gamble on incorporating unproven technology that could offer revolutionary performance. Dutch Kindleberger, North American's president, made the call. They would redesign the aircraft with swept wings. The company would absorb the additional development costs and time as an investment in creating a superior product. If it worked, they'd have the best fighter in the American arsenal. If it failed, they might lose the contract entirely. Engineers worked frantically to incorporate swept wings into the design while maintaining the other performance requirements. The wing sweep settled at 35 degrees, a compromise between maximum high-speed performance and acceptable low-speed handling for carrier operations. The fuselage required lengthening to maintain stability. The tail surfaces needed redesigning. Control systems required modification to address the different aerodynamic characteristics. Wind tunnel testing validated the design. The swept wings delayed compressibility problems significantly, allowing the aircraft to operate efficiently at much higher speeds than straight-wing contemporaries. But wind tunnels couldn't fully predict how the aircraft would handle in real flight conditions, particularly at the edges of the performance envelope. The prototype, now redesignated XP-86, made its first flight on October 1, 1947. Test pilot George Welch, a Pearl Harbor veteran who had shot down Japanese aircraft during the attack, took the controls. The flight proceeded smoothly, and subsequent test flights revealed performance that exceeded expectations. On April 26, 1948, Welch pushed the XP-86 past Mach 1 in a shallow dive, the first American jet fighter to exceed the speed of sound. Though this wasn't officially announced at the time, Chuck Yeager had broken the sound barrier in the rocket-powered X-1 6 months earlier. But the Saber proved that swept-wing technology could enable operational jet fighters to reach transonic speeds.
The Navy ultimately decided they wanted a different aircraft for carrier operations, but the Air Force immediately recognized the Saber's potential. Orders poured in for what was now designated the F-86 Saber. Creating a production fighter from the experimental prototypes required solving numerous engineering challenges. The swept wings that provided high-speed performance created problems at low speeds. Stall characteristics were tricky. The wingtips could stall before the wing roots, causing sudden loss of control. Landing approaches required careful speed management to avoid dropping out of the sky. North American engineers incorporated leading-edge slats that deployed automatically at low speeds, improving airflow over the wings and maintaining lift. These slats would become a distinctive feature of the Saber, visible as narrow panels along the wing's leading edge. The power plant presented its own challenges. Early production Sabers used the General Electric J47 engine, producing around 5,200 pounds of thrust. This was adequate for early models, but left pilots wanting more power, particularly when engaging enemy aircraft at high altitude, where engine performance degraded in the thin air. The Saber's armament consisted of 6 .50 caliber machine guns mounted in the nose. This represented conventional thinking. Machine guns had been standard fighter armament since World War I. However, the convergence of high-speed jet combat and rifle-caliber weapons created problems. At the closing speeds typical of jet engagements, pilots only had seconds to fire. The relatively light .50 caliber rounds lacked the destructive power to reliably down an enemy fighter with a short burst. But the Saber incorporated one crucial advantage: the A1CM computing gun sight. This electromechanical computer accepted inputs for target range, wingspan, and angle off, then calculated the proper lead angle for gunnery. When the pilot put the illuminated reticle on target and fired, the guns actually aimed slightly ahead, placing bullets where the enemy aircraft would be. This significantly improved hit probability compared to older fixed gun sights. The cockpit layout reflected lessons learned from World War II. Instruments were logically arranged. Critical controls fell naturally to hand. The bubble canopy provided excellent visibility, crucial in air combat where seeing your opponent first often determined survival. Pilots transitioning from piston fighters found the Saber relatively easy to master, though the higher speeds required adjusting their tactical thinking. Production ramped up through the late 1940s with improved models incorporating refinements based on testing and pilot feedback. By 1950, F-86As were equipping Air Force squadrons as the service's premier fighter. The aircraft had proven itself in testing and training, but no one had yet fought a MiG-15 in combat. That was about to change.
When North Korea invaded South Korea in June 1950, the initial air war consisted of American piston engine fighters and early jets, like the F-80 Shooting Star, engaging North Korean propeller aircraft. The technological disparity was overwhelming. American aircraft dominated the skies. Then, in November 1950, everything changed. MiG-15s appeared over North Korea, flown by pilots who demonstrated surprising skill. The first encounter shocked American commanders. The MiG-15 could outclimb American jets, operate effectively at higher altitudes, and accelerate away from pursuits. Its heavy armament, two 23mm and one 37mm cannon, could destroy a bomber or fighter with a single well-placed burst. F-80 pilots found themselves completely outmatched. The straight-wing Shooting Star had been adequate against piston engine opponents, but against the MiG-15 it was hopelessly outclassed. Urgent calls went out for deployment of America's swept-wing fighter. The 4th Fighter Interceptor Wing, equipped with F-86A Sabers, received orders to Korea in December 1950. The unit rushed preparations, with aircraft and personnel deploying to Kimpo Air Base near Seoul. The Sabers would face their first real test against an opponent that matched or exceeded their capabilities. On December 17, 1950, the first Saber versus MiG engagement occurred. Lieutenant Colonel Bruce Hinton led a flight of F-86s that intercepted MiG-15s over the Yalu River. In the swirling dogfight that followed, Hinton maneuvered onto a MiG's tail and fired. The MiG went down, the first aerial victory for the F-86 Saber. But that engagement also revealed that the MiG-15 was no easy opponent. Soviet pilots, because that's who was really flying many of these aircraft, though this remained classified for decades, demonstrated tactical discipline and good situational awareness. The MiG's performance advantages at high altitude were real and significant. American pilots quickly learned that engaging MiGs required exploiting the Saber's advantages while avoiding fights that played to the MiG's strengths. The Saber handled better at high speeds. Its controls remained effective in transonic flight, where the MiG became sluggish. The Saber could outturn the MiG at lower altitudes. And perhaps most importantly, American pilots generally had better training and more flight experience than their opponents. The section of North Korean airspace near the Yalu River became the most contested airspace in the world. MiG-15s operated from bases in Manchuria, where they were immune to American attack due to political restrictions. They would cross into North Korean airspace, engage American fighters and bombers, then retreat across the border when threatened. For Saber pilots, missions into MiG Alley followed a familiar pattern. Flights of 4 aircraft, 2 elements of 2, would climb to altitude and head north. The tension built as they approached the river. Radar operators would call out contacts. Then the radio chatter would begin. MiGs high, 10 o'clock, or bandits diving from the sun. The engagements occurred at altitudes where both aircraft operated near their limits. At 40,000 feet, the air was so thin that aircraft responded sluggishly to control inputs. Turn rates decreased. Energy management became critical, trading altitude for speed or speed for altitude while maintaining enough of both to remain combat effective. Captain Joseph McConnell, who would become the war's top ace with 16 victories, described the experience. The MiGs typically held altitude advantage initially, diving to attack. Saber pilots would see them coming and either turn into them, forcing the MiGs to maneuver and lose their energy advantage, or dive away, accepting the retreat but preserving their aircraft and building speed for future engagements. The computing gun sight proved its worth. In the fraction of a second when a firing opportunity presented itself, the sight's calculations meant the difference between hits and misses. Pilots learned to trust the computed lead, placing the pipper on target and firing short bursts. The 650 caliber guns, while lighter than the MiG's cannons, fired at a higher rate and were easier to aim accurately. Fuel management added another layer of complexity. The Saber's range was limited, and fighting at full throttle consumed fuel rapidly. Pilots constantly monitored their gauges, calculating whether they had enough gas to continue fighting or needed to disengage and head south. Running out of fuel over North Korea meant ejection and almost certain capture. The physical demands were intense. High-G maneuvers pulled blood from the brain, causing gray out or blackout if sustained too long. The G-suits helped, but couldn't completely counteract the forces. Pilots developed techniques for straining their muscles to maintain blood pressure during hard turns. Winter conditions added misery to danger. Cockpit heating struggled to overcome the extreme cold at altitude. Pilots wore heavy flight suits, gloves, and boots, but still returned from missions with numb fingers and toes. Frostbite was common. The aircraft themselves required special attention. Fluids had to be heated to prevent freezing, and engines needed careful warm-up procedures. Despite the challenges, Saber pilots consistently achieved victory ratios that heavily favored them. Official figures claimed kill ratios of 10 to 1 or higher, 10 MiGs destroyed for every Saber lost in combat. Modern analysis suggests the actual ratio was lower, perhaps 4 to 1 or 5 to 1, as both sides overclaimed victories in the confusion of combat. But even the conservative estimates indicate the F-86 dominated its primary opponent.
The Korean War produced America's first jet aces, pilots who achieved 5 or more aerial victories. Names like Joseph McConnell, James Jabara, and Manuel Fernandez became famous as their victory tallies climbed. These pilots developed tactics specifically for jet combat. The formations, maneuvers, and techniques from World War II required modification for aircraft that fought at twice the speed and much higher altitudes. Energy management, maintaining speed and altitude became paramount. Pilots learned to think three-dimensionally, using vertical maneuvers to gain advantage. The yo-yo maneuver exemplified this new thinking. When a Saber pilot found himself overshooting an opponent, closing too fast to maintain position, he would pull up sharply, climbing above and behind the target. The maneuver traded speed for altitude, slowing the Saber while maintaining position relative to the enemy. Then the pilot could roll over the top and dive back down, reacquiring the target with a speed advantage. Meanwhile, the F-86 continued evolving. The F-86E model introduced an all-flying tail. The entire horizontal stabilizer moved rather than just the elevator. This improved control effectiveness at high speeds, where traditional elevator surfaces became less responsive. The F-86F followed with a more powerful engine and a modified wing, further enhancing performance. By 1952, the latest Sabers could match or exceed MiG-15 performance in most regimes. Pilots of the F-86F reported that they no longer felt disadvantaged in any aspect of combat. The aircraft remained demanding to fly well, but in the hands of a skilled pilot, it was a formidable weapon. The advanced trainer variant, the T-33 Shooting Star, helped prepare pilots for jet combat. But nothing fully replicated the experience of dogfighting at 40,000 feet against an opponent trying to kill you. New pilots arriving in Korea faced a steep learning curve. Squadron commanders tried to pair rookies with experienced pilots who could keep them alive during those crucial first missions. Some didn't survive the learning process. Combat losses, accidents, and operational attrition claimed aircraft and pilots throughout the war. Each loss represented not just an expensive machine, but a highly trained aviator who had spent years developing his skills. The Korean War ended with an armistice in July 1953. When the shooting stopped, the F-86 Saber had proven itself as the world's premier fighter aircraft. Its combat record validated the decision to incorporate German swept-wing research into American designs. But the Saber's impact extended far beyond Korea. The aircraft served with numerous Allied air forces, exported to countries including Canada, Australia, Japan, and various NATO members. Licensed production in Canada and Japan produced thousands of additional aircraft. The Saber became the backbone of Western air defenses during the 1950s. The lessons learned from Korean combat influenced a generation of fighter designs. The importance of speed, altitude performance, and effective fire control systems became doctrine. The next generation of American fighters, the F-100 Super Saber, F-104 Starfighter, and others, incorporated these lessons. The story of the Saber's development also revealed how technical intelligence shaped military technology. The captured German research didn't just give America the F-86, it accelerated development by years, possibly decades. Without that knowledge transfer, American designers would have eventually discovered swept-wing benefits through their own research, but the timeline would have been much longer. Similarly, Soviet access to German technology and British engines enabled the MiG-15's rapid development. The Cold War's technological competition was built partly on Nazi Germany's wartime research, with both superpowers racing to exploit captured knowledge. The ethical questions surrounding Operation Paperclip, bringing German scientists to America despite some having questionable pasts, remain debated. But the technical benefits were undeniable. The F-86 Saber, born from captured research and refined through combat experience, represented the transformation of knowledge into capability. In the frozen skies over Korea,
where America's swept-wing fighter battled the Soviet swept-wing interceptor, both aircraft traced their lineage to German wind tunnels and research facilities. The spoils of victory in World War II had been converted into weapons for the next conflict. The F-86 Saber earned its place in aviation history not just as a successful fighter aircraft, but as evidence of how military technology evolves through combination of innovation, espionage, and combat refinement. From captured documents to combat victories, the Saber's story embodied the transformation of stolen secrets into a machine that dominated the skies and shaped the future of aerial warfare.